One could argue that if the winter had been any gentler, Runa would never have given her only blanket to a dying stranger, and the Altha King would never have come back through the hollows at dawn to find her. But then again, if the crown had ever spared a single thought for the people freezing in its own shadow, the stranger would not have been dying in a doorway in the first place, and there would have been no blanket to give at all. So really, if one followed the whole thing down to the root of it, none of what came after was Runa's doing. It was the winter's fault, and the winter, everyone agreed, belonged to the king. All of it did. Every frozen inch of that miserable year. Runa had walked the same road home for as long as she could remember, and the road had never once been glad to see her. It ran from the almshouse, down through the crooked lanes, where the lamp oil ran out early, and the frost climbed the walls like ivy, and she kept to the middle of it, her one blanket wound twice about her shoulders, and a basket of spent jars knocking against her hip. She was 19 years old that winter, thin as a green reed, and so long accustomed to going unseen that she had half forgotten she owned a face at all. She had spent the day as she spent every day, bent over the cots of the people the rest of the city had given up on. Mother Alder ran the almshouse, and the poor of the hollows loved Mother Alder the way grander cities loved their saints. Runa loved her too. Mother Alder had taken her in as a foundling, a nameless scrap left crying at the door with no people to claim her, and had given her a warm corner and a trade to fill her hands. She paid it back the only way she knew, by being useful, by being quiet, by asking for nothing. A girl with nothing learned early not to want. Wanting was for people who could afford to be disappointed. That night, the cold was a living creature. It found the seams of her and settled in to stay. She was thinking of nothing grander than her own thin palate, and the small, mean warmth of it when she saw the shape slumped in the doorway of the old tannery. At first she took it for a heap of dropped rags. Then the heap drew a breath, ragged and wet, and let it go again. She should have kept walking. Every hard year of her life told her to. Instead, her feet carried her over before her good sense could stop them, because that was the one part of her that had never learned to stay quiet. She crouched. It was a man, folded down into himself, soaked through and shaking in a way that had already begun to slow, which she knew from long practice was the worst way of all. He was near the end of it. Runa pressed 2 fingers under his jaw. His pulse was there, far off and stumbling. His skin had gone the gray of old snow. She did the arithmetic she always did, quick and cold. She had 1 blanket. Give it to him. And she would be the one, shaking by morning, and no one ever gave Runa a blanket. That was simply the shape of the world. She gave it to him anyway. She stripped it from her own shoulders and wrapped it twice around the stranger, tucking it under him, where the heat leached out fastest. And she did the work her hands knew better than her mind did. She got him out of the wind. She built a small fire from the tannery's rotten scrap and coaxed it high. She warmed river stones and packed them against him, and she brewed what her basket held, a bitter thread of dried yarrow and something stronger, and got it past his cracked lips, a spoonful at a time through the night. Somewhere in the dark, he began to surface. His eyes never opened, but he spoke, low and broken and certain the way the fevered are certain, about a betrayal, about a house that was not safe, about a name he would not let go of. Runa did not listen. She had sat with too many dying people to steal their last secrets. She only kept her hand on his chest so he would know, wherever he was, that he was not alone in it. "Hush now," she told him. "You are not dying tonight. I will not allow it. I have you." It was somewhere in that hour, with her palm flat over his slowing heart, that she felt the thing she would spend a long time afterward trying to explain away. A thread of warmth, thin as spider silk, ran up her arm from the place where they touched. It did not come from the fire, it came from him. And it did not feel like heat so much as it felt like being noticed, for the very first time in her life, by someone who had not yet even seen her face. She told herself it was exhaustion. She told herself a great many sensible things. Then she looked at his hands where they had fallen open on the folded blanket, and the sensible things went quiet. They were not a beggar's hands. They were scarred across the knuckles the way a swordsman's are, and clean under the dirt, and on the smallest finger of the left there was the pale, untanned band, where a ring had been worn every day for years and lately taken off. She turned his wrist, beneath the grime, worked into the skin over the pulse, was a mark she had seen only once in her life, stamped on the coin that the almshouse was never given enough of, the Grey Wolf of Greyholt, the mark of the crown itself. Runa sat back on her heels in the failing firelight, her breath gone to fog, and understood that the dying man under her only blanket was no one she was ever meant to touch. She meant to stay awake. She meant to be gone before he woke, and take her small mercy with her, but the night had emptied her out, and warmth is a thief, and she slept. When the gray hour came, and she jerked awake against the cold tannery wall, the fire was ash and the man was gone. Her blanket was gone with him. There was only the flattened place where he had lain, and the river stones, still faintly warm, and the sick certainty in her chest that she had done something the world would not let her simply walk away from. Then, far down in the sleeping city, the great bells of the palace began to ring, not the slow toll of a death, the wild glad clamor of a return. And Runa, kneeling in the ashes, with no blanket and no name for what she had felt, knew before anyone told her exactly whose return it was. By the time the sun had dragged itself over the gray hills, the whole of the hollows was talking, and all of it said the same impossible thing. The Alpha King was alive. Runa heard it in pieces as she went, the way she heard everything, from the edges of other people's conversations. The king had vanished 5 nights past. There had been an attempt on his life, whispered the ones who claimed to know. A blade or a poison or both, and he had slipped his own palace with his hunters close behind, and gone to ground somewhere no highborn would ever think to look. And then, at dawn, on foot and alone, he had walked back in through the low gate of his own capital, out of the poorest quarter in the realm, and lived, out of the hollows, out of the dark by the tannery. Runa kept her head down and her hands busy, and did the arithmetic over and over, and every time it came out the same. The scarred hands, the band where a ring had been taken off, the gray wolf worked into the skin above his pulse. The fevered talk of a house that was not safe. She had knelt in the ash with the most hunted man in the kingdom, and she had told him to hush, and she had called him a stranger. "You have gone a funny color," said Hala, dropping onto the bench beside her, with the ease of a woman who had never once in her life gone unnoticed. Hala was broad and loud, and older than Runa by a decade, and had appointed herself Runa's keeper years ago without asking. Tam trailed behind her, all elbows and hope, the youngest of the almshouse hands, and the only person alive who thought Runa was interesting. "You hear about the king," Tam said, breathless. "Came up through here, they say." "Right through our own streets." "I heard," Runa said. "They say a woman found him," Hala went on, watching her a shade too closely. "Kept him alive till morning. Half the quarter is claiming it was them. Old Biwenna swears she gave the man her own supper." "Old Binna would sell her own supper to a ghost for the story of it," Runa said, and Hala laughed, and for one moment it was an ordinary morning. Then Mother Alder came through the ward, and the moment closed like a door. She moved among the cots the way she always did, touching a forehead here, a folded hand there, and every sick face turned toward her the way plants turn to a window. She was not a large woman. She did not need to be. Love had made her the most powerful person in the Hollows long ago, and love, Runa would learn, is a far heavier thing to be ruled by than fear. "Child," Mother Alder said, coming to rest in front of Runa, and her voice was warm as ever. "You look as though you did not sleep." "I sat up with a fever," Runa said, which was true, and felt the untruth of leaving the rest out sit sour on her tongue. Mother Alder studied her. "The crown is crowing this morning," she said mildly, as though remarking on the weather. "All those bells for one man's skin, and not a single one of them ever rung for hours. She smoothed Runa's hair back with a mother's ease. Did anyone pass through the quarter in the night, do you think? Anyone who did not belong to us? And there it was, small and strange. A question asked a shade too gently, with something waiting behind it that Runa could not name. For the first time in the whole of her life, Runa looked into the face of the woman who had saved her, and she lied. No one, she said. Only the cold. Mother. Alder held her eyes a beat longer than was comfortable. Then she smiled and patted Runa's cheek and moved on, and Runa could not for her life have said why her heart was slamming against her ribs. She bent back over her jars so no one would see her face. The lie was a small one. It should have weighed nothing. Yet it sat in her chest like a swallowed stone, because in 19 years she had never once had a thing she needed to keep from Mother Alder. And now, without understanding why, she had two of them. The warmth she had felt in the dark, and the truth of who had left it there. She did not have long to wonder. Before the hour was out, the front of the almshouse filled with the sound of horses, which was a sound the hollows never made, and boots on frozen mud, and a stillness spreading inward from the door as word ran ahead of what was coming. King's men, grey cloaks and good steel, out of place among the dying as a wolf in a nursery, going cot to cot, and asking one question in low, even voices: who tended a sick traveler by the old tannery last night? The question moved down the ward, toward her one cot at a time, and with every cot it crossed, the little patch of floor she stood on seemed to grow smaller. She thought of running, and knew there was nowhere in the world to run to. She thought of the fevered voice in the dark, the betrayal, the house that was not safe, and she wondered with a sick lurch whether she had blundered into the very middle of that thing without ever knowing its name. Tam had gone white. Hala had gone still. Runa stood at the back of the ward with her spent jars in her hands and understood that there was nowhere in the world for a girl like her to hide from a thing like this. They would find her. And she did not know, could not begin to guess, whether the king had sent them to thank the woman who saved him or to quiet the only witness who had seen him brought so low. The grey cloaks parted, and the man himself walked in. Runa had built a picture of him in her mind through the long, cold night, and the picture had been a wretched one. A slack, grey face, a stumbling heart, a body she had warmed with river stones because it could not warm itself. That was the man she had knelt beside. That was the man she had dared to touch. Nothing of that man walked into the almshouse. The room changed before he had fully crossed it. Runa felt it in her own skin. The air pulling taut around a true alpha, her own wolf coming to its feet somewhere far beneath her ribs and bowing its head without being asked. He was tall, and he wore the cold like a cloak he owned. And where the dying stranger had been grey, he was all banked fire, dark-haired and pale-eyed and unhurried in the way of a man who had simply never in his life needed to hurry. He was, Runa thought with a flare of pure resentment, beautiful. She had held his failing heart under her hand, and he had the gall to stand there looking like that. Every soul in the ward went down. The sick who could kneel, knelt. The rest bowed their heads over their cots. Mother Alder sank into a curtsy of perfect grace, and only Runa, frozen at the back with her jars, forgot to move at all. His pale eyes found her across the whole length of the room as though the crowd between them were not there, and they did not let go. You, he said. It was not a question, and it was not the voice of a king addressing a stranger. Runa's stomach dropped clean through the floor. Severin, his shield, a scarred giant of a man at his shoulder, shifted as if to send soldiers after her, but the king lifted 2 fingers and the giant went still. The king crossed to her himself. He stopped close, closer than a king had any right to stand to a drudge, and when he spoke again, he pitched it low, for her alone, beneath the held breath of the entire room. You told me I was not dying that night, he said quietly. You told me you would not allow it. He tilted his head, and something moved behind the pale eyes that she could not read. I heard every word, Runa. I was further down than you knew, and I heard you call me back. The floor of the world tilted. He had been past speech, past knowing. She had been certain of it, and he had heard her. He had carried her voice up out of the dark with him. No one had ever carried anything of hers anywhere. She had spent the whole of her life being the one who carried, and she did not know what to do with the sudden unbearable weight of having been heard. Then he straightened, and he turned, and he spoke to the room, and his voice filled it to the corners. 5 nights ago, men I trusted tried to put me in the ground, he said. I ran to the one place in my kingdom my enemies would never think to look for a king. And in that place, half dead in the dirt, I was found by a woman who did not know my face, who had 1 blanket to her name, and who gave it to me anyway, and asked me for nothing. He looked back at Runa, and the whole ward looked with him, and she wished with her entire soul that the frozen floor would open and take her. A bond woke between us in that dark, he said. Here where the winter never lets go, you all know what that is worth. It cannot be faked, and it cannot be undone, and it does not care that she is low-born and I am not. He let that settle. Then, clear and final, before every witness in the quarter, he said, she saved the life of your king, and your king has come back for her. She will be brought to Greyholt under my own protection, and no hand in this realm will be laid on her but mine. The ward erupted in a low roar of astonishment. Runa did not hear most of it. She was staring at him, and one cold, clear thought was rising through her shock, like a splinter working free. She had felt the thread of warmth that night. She had. But a bond, a true one, the kind the North held sacred. She would know a bond. And this was not that, or not only that, and she was certain in her bones that the magnificent liar standing over her knew it too. He had built a beautiful story in front of a room full of witnesses, and every stone of it was chosen to fit some purpose he had not named. Why? She thought, staring up at him. Why come back through a quarter that hates you? Hours out of your own deathbed to stand in front of your enemies and claim a girl who is nothing. Why me? What do you actually want? As the gray cloaks moved to gather her, the king bent one last time to her ear, and under the noise of the crowd he answered the question she had not asked aloud. And it was not gratitude, and it was not a bond, and it turned her blood to ice. I did not come back for the blanket, he murmured. I came back because in a palace full of people who want me dead, you are the only living soul I know for certain did not. He drew back, and the courtly warmth slid over his face like a mask, settling into place, and only she had seen what was underneath it. Do try to look pleased, my lady. We are going to save each other's lives, you and I. And then the king's men closed around her, and the doors of the only home she had ever known fell shut at her back. Greyholt Palace was warm, and that was the first thing about it that frightened her. Runa had spent 19 years learning the exact geography of cold, how it pooled, how it bit, how to sleep small. So it took less of you. Warmth she did not trust. Warmth, in her experience, was given and then taken away, and the taking always cost more than the giving had been worth. So when they led her through door after door into a chamber with a fire roaring in a hearth taller than she was, and a bed wide enough for a whole Hollows family, and told her it was hers, her first thought was to wonder what it would cost, and when the bill would come due. They took her ruined clothes, they washed the tannery smoke out of her hair, they dressed her in gray wool finer than anything she had ever touched, the color, someone murmured, of the royal house itself. And Runa stood before a polished glass and did not know the tall plain woman looking back at her. She waited for the fear to pass, and it did not, so she did with it what she always did. She put it to work. She walked the chamber the way she walked a sick body, hunting what was wrong. She checked the window latches and the shadows behind the hangings. She smelled the water in the jug before she drank, and the oil in the lamp before she trusted the flame. Old habits of a quarter where careless women did not grow old. If the king meant to keep her, she would at least learn the shape of the cage. When they came for her at dusk, they brought her not to a great hall, but to a small warm room, with a table laid for two, and Corvin was already there. In the almshouse he had been a force, a kind of weather. Here in the lamplight, sleeves turned back, and no audience to perform for. He was only a man, and a man was a far more dangerous thing to be shut in a room with. "Sit," he said. "You have not eaten since they brought you in," I asked. "I am not hungry," Runa said, which was a lie, and sat as far from him as the table would allow. He watched with open amusement as she turned her cup a slow quarter round to see what floated in it. "You believe I would have you poisoned at my own table," he said, "after all the trouble I went to fetching you." "I believe," Runa said, "that I do not know you at all, and I believe the last person who fed me a warm meal in a warm room did it because she wanted a foundling too grateful to ever ask a question, so I have learned to ask them." Something crossed his face, quick and interested, and was gone. "Good," he said quietly. "That is precisely why you are here." "Then tell me why," she said. "Not the story you told the Hollows. The bond woke, you said. Sacred. Cannot be faked." She leaned forward, despite herself. "I felt something, that night. I will not pretend I did not. But I have sat beside 100 dying strangers, and never once felt my whole life reach up and take hold of one. You have dressed whatever passed between us in a great deal of costume. It did not come wearing. So, tell me the true shape of it." For a long moment he said nothing, only studied her the way she had studied the room, as though hunting what was wrong with her, or what was right. "You are correct," he said at last, and the ease dropped out of his voice, and what was left was tired and plain, and far more persuasive for it. "It is not the bond of the songs, not yet, and perhaps not ever. But I did not lie about all of it. Something is there, and I have felt it every hour since, and it is convenient, which I will not insult you by pretending it is not." "Convenient? How?" she said. He looked at her. "I had you looked into before I ever knocked on that door. Runa, you are a foundling, with no name and no house. You belong to no faction, because no faction ever wanted you. The woman who raised you took in strays and asked nothing, and you have spent your life being no one worth watching." He said it without cruelty, which was somehow worse. "In a palace where every soul I trusted turned out to hold a knife. You are the single person in the realm I know did not. You saved a dying man you had no reason to know was worth saving. That cannot be bought and it cannot be faked, and I need it more than I have needed anything in my life." Runa sat very still. "So I am useful," she said. Her voice came out, flatter than she meant. That was the word. "The best kind," he said. And then, more gently, "I know how that lands. I am asking you to let it land anyway. Ask me what, exactly." He rose and returned from a cabinet with a small stoppered vial, which he set between them on the white cloth as carefully as a man sets down a live coal. Inside was a residue, dark and greasy, that caught the lamplight wrong. "They did not try to kill me once," he said. "They have been killing me slowly for the better part of the winter. This was scraped from the cup I drank the night I ran. My own physicians called it a fever and bled me for it." He met her eyes. "You knew what was wrong with me in the dark, by a tannery with nothing but your hands. They did not know sitting in the finest sick room in the north. So I will ask you plainly. Stand at my side, wear the story I built, and find me the one thing every wise man in this palace has failed to find. Find how it still reaches me, because it does. I can feel it reaching me even now." Runa looked down at the vial, and against every instinct of self-preservation she owned, her hands itched to open it. They gave her the still room that had belonged to the last royal herbalist, a long stone chamber under the north tower, and within a day it was the only place in the whole gleaming palace where Runa could breathe. Here at least the language was one she spoke. Drying racks and copper stills, jars of root and resin, the good, clean bitterness of a working stillroom. She threw the shutters wide to the cold. She trusted, tied back her hair, and opened the king's vial. And the palace and its terrors fell away behind the work. Corvin came the first morning, and did not leave. He sat on the stool across the bench like a man who had nowhere better to be in all his kingdom, and he watched her work with an attention that should have been unnerving, and was, instead, she would only admit, much later, the first thing about him she truly liked. No one had ever wanted to learn a thing she knew. In the hollows her craft was simply expected, the way a wall is expected to hold a roof. To be asked and then listened to was so new it made her clumsy. "Tell me what you see," he said. So she told him. She warmed the residue and let him smell the layers of it as they lifted. The false sweetness laid over the rot, the way a careful hand had built it so a man would taste only good wine and call his sickness luck. She showed him how it was meant to gather in the body, slowly, a little at each cup, so that no single meal could ever be blamed. "This is not a soldier's poison," she said. "A soldier wants you dead by supper. This wants you dead by spring, and wants everyone to swear it was fever that did it." "Clever," he said, watching her hands. "Patient," she corrected. "Which is worse?" And then, before she could stop herself, she said the thing that had been rising in her since the first breath of it, and it is craftwork. This layering, the way the bitter is folded under the sweet. This is not a court poison bought from some traveling seller. This is Hollow's work. This is how we do it, where I am from. She heard her own words land, and wished them back. But Corvin did not startle, and that was the thing that stopped her heart. He only nodded, slow, as though she had confirmed something he had carried a long while. "You are not surprised," she said. "No," he agreed, "I am not." She set down the vial. All at once, the warmer pour of the morning had a cold floor beneath it. He had let her arrive at it herself, had watched her walk the whole path to a truth he already held, which meant his choosing her, the foundling from the poorest quarter in the realm. The girl who knew the poisons of the poor had never for one moment been the accident of a grateful king. It had been aimed. Before she could name the fear taking shape in her, he was on his feet. "Walk with me," he said. "You have been shut in this room 3 days. I would show you something." He led her, not through the bright galleries, but down, through a servant's stair and a cold vaulted passage where the palace forgot to be a palace and was only old stone. She understood later that he did it on purpose, that a king who has been hunted learns to love the roots no one watches. She did not understand it in time to matter. They were halfway along the passage when Runa's wolf lifted its head beneath her skin. She had walked the hollows at every black hour of the night. She knew the particular quality a silence takes on just before it breaks. "Down," she said, and did not wait to be obeyed, and shoved the king of all the north into the wall with both hands as the first blade came out of the dark where no blade should have been. It hissed past her shoulder and opened a cold line across her upper arm, and she smelled it even as it cut her, that same folded sweetness, the same craft. Poisoned. She did not have time to be afraid of it. There were 3 of them, rapt and quiet and good at this, and she was one Hollow's woman, with a stillroom knife, and a king at her back. So she fought the way the poor fight, which is to say without honor and to win. She took the lamp from its bracket and flung burning oil into the first rapt face. She drove her stillroom knife into the second man's shoulder and turned him aside, close and desperate, and nothing like the careful work her hands were made for. The third she did not have to reach, because Severin came down the passage like a falling tower with 2 of his own behind him, and what had been an ambush became, in a breath, a rout. A short, sharp whistle sounded from the dark, and the last of them broke and ran, not scattering in panic, but peeling away together, clean and drilled, professionals leaving a job half done. Then it was over, and the passage stank of oil and blood. and Runa stood shaking with her ruined sleeve going dark and warm. Corvin took her arm in both hands, and for the first time since the almshouse, the mask was entirely gone. He was not afraid for himself. He was white with fear for her. "Your arm," he said. "Runa, it is poisoned. I can smell it, we have to." "I know what it is," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised them both. "I made worse than this at 14. Get me to my still room, and stop crowding me." And then, because he was still gripping her as though she might vanish, she looked up at his face, at the terror in it that no king was supposed to show for a drudge, and she said the thing that frightened her more than the blade had. "You are not surprised by this either." She searched his eyes. "You knew they would come. You walked me down here in the dark, and you knew. Am I bait, or are you, Corvin? Because one of us is." He did not answer, and his silence was its own reply, and Runa understood with a cold that had nothing to do with the winter that the man she was bleeding for had known the shape of tonight before he ever took her hand. Nothing about the way he looked at her had ever been an accident, not one moment of it. The cut healed clean because she tended it herself and let no palace physician near it, and the days that followed did the one thing she had sworn she would never let them do. They grew easy. She told herself she watched him for the work. She was hunting a poisoner after all, and a poisoner who used the craft of her own quarter, and the surest way to the source was to learn the king so well that any wrong note in the house around him would sound to her like a cracked bell. So, she watched him. She watched how he was 3 different men in a day, the bright one for the court, the sharp one for his council, and the quiet, tired one who came to her still room at night with 2 cups of something hot and no reason to be there at all. She catalogued him the way she catalogued a symptom, and somewhere in the cataloging, the truth she could not file crept up on her like a fever, which is to say slowly, and then, all at once, she stopped watching him for danger. She simply watched him. She watched the way lamplight moved down the line of his throat when he tipped his head back to laugh, a real laugh, the surprised kind he seemed to save for the things she said. She watched his hands when he handled her jars with a care he thought she did not notice. She lay awake in the enormous warm bed that still did not feel like hers, with her mended arm aching and her whole traitor body humming, and she thought about the tired, quiet man and his 2 cups of cocoa until her breath went short in the dark. It was, on such a night, sent to fetch a salve from his chambers because he had scalded his hand and was too proud to say so, that she found it. His rooms were a king's rooms, and she moved through them quickly, wanting to be gone before wanting to stay. She found the salve. She was turning to go when she saw, folded over the arm of the chair nearest his fire, in a room that could have dressed itself in cloth of gold, a blanket. Her blanket. Thin and gray and worn soft, mended at one corner with her own clumsy stitching from a winter years past, the only thing she had ever owned, the thing he had taken from a tannery floor, and she had told herself a dying man was welcome to. He had kept it. In all this warmth, with all this wealth, the king of the north had carried her one poor blanket up out of the dark, and folded it over his chair, where he could see it from his bed. She thought of every year she had spent believing herself the most easily forgotten thing in the world, a child you could leave at a door and never think of again. And here was the one worthless thing she had ever pressed into another person's hands, kept by a man who could have had anything the realm could make. Runa stood holding it and felt the last of her defenses go out of her like breath. She was still standing there when he came in. He saw her, and he saw what she held, and the easy thing he had been about to say died on his mouth. For once in his gilded life, the king of all the north had nothing ready. "Why do you have this?" she said. Her voice was not steady now. He crossed the room slowly. "The way you crossed is something that might bolt." "Because it is the only thing anyone has ever given me," he said. "That did not want the throne back for it." "Tell me it is a scheme," she said, and the words came out of her raw and fast, everything she had been holding down for weeks, tearing loose at once. Tell me you kept it, because it is useful, because a sentimental king plays well, because it serves some purpose I cannot see. Tell me anything but the true thing, because I am not built to want what I cannot keep, and you are making me want, and I cannot. Corvin, I cannot do this and stay standing. Want what? He said, very low, no teasing left in him at all. You know what. He took the blanket from her hands and set it aside, and he did not step back. What if it is no scheme, he said. What if I simply want you? Not the craft, not the clean pair of hands in a poisoned house. You. What if I have wanted you, since you knelt in the ash and told a dying man he was not alone? Men like you, she whispered, do not want women like me. Then tell me to stop, he said, and I will go. His voice dropped to almost nothing, or ask me to prove it. The still room of her careful mind went white and quiet. Prove it, she said. He kissed her, and the world she had built out of going without. His hand found the back of her neck, and his mouth was warm and certain and unhurried, and there was no court to perform for, and no crowd to lie to, only the fire, and the two of them, and the enormous fact of him. And then it came, the thing she had felt once in the ashes, and spent months swearing away. The thread of warmth ran up from every place they touched, and became a flood. And it was his, unmistakably his, pouring into her in a realm where warmth was the rarest thing there was. She felt what he felt. She felt herself wanted, plainly and helplessly, and without a single angle to it, and no one, in 19 hard years, had ever wanted Runa for nothing but herself, and it undid her completely. She fisted her hand in his collar and held on as though she might otherwise fall. The fire burned low, and neither of them rose to tend it, and for the first time in her whole life the cold did not find her at all. Much later, warm and quiet, and tucked against his side, with his heart steady under her ear, she almost let herself believe it. She almost slept. Then a fist hammered at the chamber door, and Severin's voice came through it low and urgent, and the word he said put the whole cold world back into the room in a breath. The foreign king had come to Greyholt. He had come with his household, and his guard, and his unwed daughter, and by the old law, a bonded king must present his intended to a visiting crown within the night. In 2 days there would be a ball, and Runa would be paraded in front of the one court in all the world most eager to see Corvin dead, on the arm of a bond that both of them knew was still half a lie. The gown they put her in was the deep gray of the royal house, and when Runa saw herself in the glass, she understood they had not dressed her to be looked at, they had dressed her to be believed. The great hall of Greyholt had been lit until it hurt. 1,000 candles, the long tables gleaming, the high-born of the north in their furs and their jewels, and every last one of them turning to watch as the king brought his low-born bride in on his arm. Runa had stood in front of armed men without flinching. She had never in her life been so afraid. These were the ones Corvin meant, when he said every soul I trusted held a knife. Somewhere in this bright worm room was the hand that had folded the poison, and it was smiling at her. Smile back, Corvin murmured against her hair, as though he had heard the thought. Let them wonder what you know. At the high table sat the visiting crown. King Halvard was a broad grey wolf of a man, courteous and cold, and beside him, his daughter Celine, young and quiet and watchful, a girl sent north to be spent on an alliance. Runa marked her the way she marked everything, and thought, without knowing why, that the girl looked like someone waiting for a blow. Corvin was magnificent that night, and Runa hated how easily he did it. He was warm to the cold lords, and clever with the foreign king, and gracious to the daughter, and not once did the smile slip. But she had spent a season learning him, and she could see the cost of it now. The faint white at the corners of his mouth, the way his hand tightened on his cup between one performance and the next. He drew her out onto a gallery above the gardens, when the dancing began into the cold and the quiet. And there, at last, the smile came off. "You hate this," she said. "Hate is a strong word," he said, looking out at the dark. Then, tired, "I have been doing this since I was 19. Smiling, performing, being the thing they need, so they do not look too closely at the thing I am." He shook his head. "I cannot always tell anymore whether that makes me clever or only hollow." "You are not hollow," Runa said before she could weigh it. She reached up and touched his jaw, and felt him go still under her hand. "I have had my hands inside what you are. I warmed it back to life on a floor. Whatever they think they are bowing to in there, it is not the half of you." Something broke open behind his eyes. "Runa," he said rough, and turned his face into her palm, and kissed her. And the bond came fully awake. It was not the thread of the ashes, and not the flood of the still room. It was a door thrown wide. His whole heart poured through the place where they touched, relief and fear and a want so tender it hurt to hold, and it was his, distinct and clear and utterly foreign, inside her, and she felt herself be, for one unbearable instant, entirely known. It was the thing she had spent her whole life making certain never happened. To be seen, all the way down, past the usefulness and the competence, and the plain, strong back the whole quarter leaned on. To the frightened, wanting girl underneath, he had all of her in his hands now, and she could not breathe. She jerked back with a gasp. His eyes were black in the dark. "Did you?" he began. "Runa, that was it. Was the cold," she said. "It was nothing." She watched the words land and do their work. Watched the light go out of his face and something careful slide into its place. The same courtly distance he wore for the men who wanted him dead. "Right," he said quietly. "Of course, nothing." She had wounded him, and she had done it on purpose, because a bond that could see into her that way was the one weapon in the world she did not know how to survive. They went back in. The music swelled, and Halvard called for the loving cup, the old rite. One vessel of dark wine shared between two crowns to seal an alliance in front of the gods. A steward carried it the length of the hall on a cloth of white, and the whole court rose, and Corvin reached to take it first, as the host must. Runa smelled it from 6 feet away. Under the wine and the spice, folded down beneath the good sweet smell of the vintage, was the craft. Keyed, and careful, and meant for one throat. She had a heartbeat to choose, and every choice was a disaster. Cry poison over the Alliance Cup with a foreign king watching, and she called Halvard's own gift an attempt on his life. And there would be war before the candles guttered, so she did not cry poison. She stumbled. She caught her slipper on her own hem, a clumsy low-born girl overcome by the grandness of it all, and she fell into the steward, and the cup, and its cloth, and its dark wine went across the flagstones in a spreading stain, while the court gasped and tittered behind their hands. "Forgive me," she stammered, red to the roots. "Forgive me, your majesties. I am not made for such rooms." Halvard's mouth thinned in contempt. Corvin laughed it off with an easy word and drew her away, and only she felt how hard his hand was shaking where it gripped hers. In the passage he rounded on her, low and fierce. "You will tell no one," he said. "Not Severin. Not the watch. No one. Someone just tried to kill you in front of a foreign crown," she hissed. "Yes," he said. "And if one word of it leaves this passage, Halvard will believe I staged it to break the alliance, or that I cannot keep my own house. And either way, there is a war by morning that will bury the hollows first." He gripped her shoulders. "I need you to trust me. I know the shape of what I am doing. Let me handle it my way. Can you do that?" Every part of her that was still a Hollows woman, still watching for the knife, said no. She looked at the fear he was carrying for his whole cold realm, and heard herself say, "All right, I promise." Relief crossed his face. He pressed his mouth to her forehead, quick and grateful, and the warmth she was refusing rushed the contact. "Anyway, wait for me," he said, and then he was gone back into the light to smile at the men who wanted him dead. Runa stood alone in the passage, with the promise still warm in her mouth. Then she counted to 30, the way she had been taught in a harder school, and she followed him. She kept to the walls the way the hollows had taught her, and she followed him down out of the light, through a servant's stair and along a cold corridor, until he slipped through a low door and it clicked shut behind him. She stood in the dark a long moment. Then, very quietly, she opened it. It was a small working room, a clerk's room, and Corvin was bent over the table, with Severin at his shoulder and papers spread between them under a shielded lamp. Not the papers of a poisoned man taking to his bed, the papers of a man hunting. She had spent all those weeks certain she was the one watching him. She saw now with a slow, sick lurch how neatly he had arranged to be watched. He went still when he saw her. For once he had nothing ready. "What is this?" she said. His jaw worked. "Runa." His voice was the smooth, careful one, the one he used on frightened councilmen and foreign kings. The one he had not used on her in weeks. He was using it now, and that told her more than any paper could. "You told me to tell no one," she said, "and then you come straight down here in the dark to do the very thing you forbade me." "So it was never about a war," she stepped in. "It was about keeping me out of this room. Tell me what is in it, Corvan." Severin looked to his king. Corvin nodded, and the giant gathered the papers and went, and the door shut, and they were alone with the shielded lamp. "I have been hunting the poisoner all season," Corvin said, "since before you gave me the piece I could not find." He set one sheet on the table between them, face up. "Because it is craft work, you told me. Hollow's work. This is how we do it where I am from." He watched her. "I already knew that. I have known for months that the hand feeding me death was trained in your quarter. What I did not have was a way inside a place that would never open to a crown. A place that loves the one who is killing me far too well to ever give her up." The floor of the world began to tilt her. "Runa," said. The word came out of her from very far away. "You think it is her." He did not say the name. He did not have to. She said it herself, into the lamplight. And hearing it in her own voice was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. "Mother Alder." "She takes in strays," Corvin said gently. "She asks nothing. She is beloved of every poor soul in this city, and not one of them would let a king's hand fall on the mother of the poor before tearing my throat out first." He shook his head. "She has made herself untouchable out of love, Runa. It is the cleverest armor I have ever seen. I could not move on her with a hunch. I needed proof no man alive could argue with, and I needed a way in." And there it was, the thing rising in her that she could not stop. "You needed someone she trusted," Runa said, "someone she raised, someone she would open her door to." She heard her own voice shaking. "That is why. That is the whole of it. The bond, the blanket, the story you told the Hollows. You did not come back through that quarter for a grateful girl who saved your life. You came back for the one door in the whole city that led to her." "Say I am wrong," she said. "Corvin, say I am wrong." He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him hunt for the words and not find the ones that would save either of them, and he did not say she was wrong. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She had been so stupid. All the questions he asked in the still room, the craft, the teachers, who in the Hollows still worked the old poisons, and she had thought he was interested. She had thought she was interesting. "Not all of it," he said. He came around the table and she stepped back, and he stopped at once. "It began as a way in. I will not insult you by pretending it did not, but it stopped being that, Runa. The night in my chambers, the blanket, none of that was." "Why did you not simply tell me?" she said. "Because you would not have believed me," he said low. "You have carried her the way the faithful carry a god." He shook his head. "Do you even hear yourself, the way you talk of the crown? The king never bled for us. The crown lets the poor freeze. A king ought to know what goes on in his own house." He held her eyes. "Those are not your words, Runa. You have spoken them your whole life, and never once noticed they were hers. She taught you to blame me for the cold, so you would never think to blame the woman keeping you cold. And I was right, was I not? If I had told you, you would have run straight to her. Runa opened her mouth to deny it, and could not, because she could hear it now. She could hear Mother Alder across 100 childhood evenings, gentle and certain, teaching a cold, hungry girl exactly whose fault the cold and the hunger were. She had carried the woman's grievances in her own mouth for 19 years, and called them her convictions. The voice she had thought was her own had belonged to someone else the whole time. It landed like a blow, because it was not wrong, which was the very worst of it. You knew I was innocent, she said, and her voice broke on it. You cleared me the first hour. You watched me put my own body between you and a poisoned blade. And in all of it you let me stand there loving you, and you never once told me what I was for. I know, he said. His voice was barely a breath. It is the worst thing I have ever done. She turned for the door. Runa, he said. There is a poisoner loose in my house, and a foreign crown under my roof. And he caught himself and forced it plainer. I need you, even now, even with her whole heart in pieces on a clerk's floor. Not I am sorry. Not I love you. I need you. Good night, Your Majesty, she said, and walked out into the dark. She did not remember the corridors. She came back to herself, in the cold of the North Gallery, with her hands pressed flat to the stone, and she was still there, hollowed out and shaking, when a voice she had known her whole life spoke softly out of the dark behind her. There you are, child. Mother Alder stood in the gallery in her plain gray shawl, come up out of the hollows into the palace of kings, as though she owned the floor she stood on, and the sight of her opened a wound and salved it in the same breath. Runa was moving toward her before she could think. Here was the woman who had pulled her out of nothing. Here was home. 30 years, this woman had been the warm center of the coldest quarter in the realm. And half of Runa's earliest memories were of that gray shawl and the smell of drying herbs, and a voice telling her she was wanted when the whole world had proved otherwise by leaving her crying at a door. There was no love in the whole of Runa's life that did not trace back to her. She very nearly fell into those arms and wept out the entire ruined night. Something stopped her a pace short. She never afterward. Some old animal caution. Some habit of a girl who checked the water before she drank. You are here, Runa said. In the palace. I came to see my girl honored, said Mother Alder, and her smile was warmth itself. And I came because there is dark news running through this house tonight, and I did not want you to hear it from strangers. She took Runa's cold hands in her warm ones. The foreign princess has been taken ill, poisoned. They are whispering. And they are whispering worse than that, my love. They are saying the king did it, that he dosed the girl to bend her father to the alliance, and means to blame it on some phantom enemy, to keep his own hands clean. Runa went very still. I know you have feelings for him, Alder said, stroking her knuckles. I saw it the moment he stood in my ward. But you are a good girl, and a truthful one, and Halvard will hear a truthful girl. If you tell the foreign king what manner of man Corvin truly is, you can stop a wicked marriage and a wicked reign both, and the good houses will steady the realm after he falls. Think of it, my love. A crown that has bled this quarter white for 100 winters, gone. Men who remember the poor put in its place everything you and I ever wept over at those cots, mended at last, and you the very hand that turned the key. She squeezed. It has to come from you, child, the king's own bride. No one will doubt his intended. And there, in the warm, familiar voice, Runa heard the trap close. Runa's mind, the cold, clear part of it that had kept her alive in a hard quarter, began quietly to move. She turned the words over the way she turned a poison, hunting the wrong note under the sweet. And she found it. Because the princess had been well an hour past. Because no word of any poisoning had left that hall, none. Corvin had made certain of it. She had watched him make certain. There was no rumor running through the house. There could not be. The only souls alive who knew a poison had touched this night were Corvin, and Severine, and Runa herself, and the one who had folded it. It fit together with a soft and terrible click, the way a broken bone fits when you set it. The hollow's craft. The patient poison key to a single throat. The hand that had trained every healer in the quarter, and answered to no living soul. She looked into the face of the woman who had raised her and saw it at last, the thing under the love. The way she had once seen the craft under the wine. Mother Alder had poisoned that quiet, frightened girl upstairs, to hang the crime on a king, and she had come here to make Runa, the knife, that did the cutting. For one white instant, Runa wanted to close both hands around that soft throat and be done with it. The wanting frightened her, more than anything Alder had ever poured into a cup. She let it go. One woman, against the mother of the whole Hollows, would end with Runa in a cell and Corvin in the ground by noon, and the girl upstairs dead of a fever. No one would ever think to question. She had been raised by the cleverest hand in the north, and she had learned a great deal more than poison at that knee. She let her face crumple, she let the tears come, and they were not even false. "Tell me what to say," Runa whispered. "Tell me, and I will say it." Mother Alder's eyes warmed with triumph, and she gathered her foundling in, and Runa let herself be held one last time by the only mother she had ever had, and over that gray shoulder her own face went cold, and still, and certain. Then the two of them walked together toward the East Council room, where Halvard waited, and it was the longest walk of Runa's life. Beside her, Mother Alder was calm and certain, murmuring comfort, patting her arm as she had patted it 1,000 times across a childhood. And Runa let herself be patted, and thought, with a grief so large it had gone entirely quiet, that she had loved this woman with the whole of her heart, and that all of it, every kindness, had been a way to keep a useful girl small and grateful and blind. She had one chance to turn the trap back on the woman who had set it. She had no proof, and no rank, and not one ally in that room. She had only her word and her wits and every poison Mother Alder had ever taught her. It would have to be enough. The East Council room was full and silent. Halvard sat gray and terrible at its head, and word had reached him that his daughter lay senseless, and a father's grief in a powerful man is the most dangerous thing in any room. Corvin stood to one side, with Severine behind him, and when Runa came in on Mother Alder's arm, his whole face lit for half a breath before he saw who she walked with, and the light went out. The air in the room was the airless kind that gathers before a hanging. These were people quietly deciding whether a king would live out the week, and deciding it over folded hands, in low voices, without ever once raising a blade. "Your Majesty," said Mother Alder, and her voice filled the room with sorrow, "it grieves me, beyond speaking, to bring this to you. But your daughter has been struck down under this roof, and the truth of who struck her must be told, whatever it costs. She has been poisoned, and the poison came from the king." "That is a lie," Corvin said. "Every word of it is hers." "He would say so," said Alder, gentle as grief. "Of course he would. But his own bride was at his side the whole night. She loves him. She has every reason on earth to shield him." She turned, and the whole room turned with her, to Runa silent by the door. "And still she has come here. Ask her Majesty, ask my girl what she saw." Halvard's terrible gray eyes swung to Runa. "Speak," he said. Every face in the room fixed on her, the grieving father, Mother Alder, sure of her already, and Corvin, who thought she had come to bury him. For a heartbeat, she let herself feel the full weight of what she was about to spend. Her word, the one clean thing a nameless girl had ever owned, laid down in front of a foreign crown for a man who had lied to her from the first. Then she set it down anyway, because it was true, and because the only other road in that room ended with the woman in the gray shawl winning everything. She looked at him. "I am sorry," she told him with no words at all. "I should have believed you." Then she turned to Halvard. "I saw nothing of the kind," she said, and the room drew a breath, because it did not happen. "King Corvin never went near your daughter. He was in my sight the whole of the night." She lifted her chin. "But your daughter was poisoned. That much is true. There was poison in this house tonight, and I stopped a cup of it going down the king's own throat. Not 2 hours passed, and I will stake my life on where it was made." Alder's hand closed hard on her arm. "Child," she said, low, "you are distraught. I am a healer," Runa said, pulling free. Trained by the finest hand in the hollows, she looked at Mother Alder full in the face. "And this is your work." The bitter folded under the sweet keyed slow and patient. "So a body calls it fever. I would know it anywhere. I have known it since the first breath of the cup that nearly killed the king, a winter ago." She turned back to Halvard. "Send for me, and I will draw the craft back out of your daughter and wake her before dawn, because I know the cure, because the woman who made the poison taught me that too. And then search this one's rooms in the almshouse. Now, tonight, while she stands here and cannot reach them, see whether you find the herbs of a saint or the whole black trade of a poisoner." The room snapped tight as a drawn bow. "This is madness," said Mother Alder, and for the first time in Runa's life, the warmth was gone from her voice, and what stood in the plain gray shawl was something Runa had never once been allowed to see. "Then a search cost you nothing," said Halvard quietly, and nodded to his guard, and Mother Alder moved. She was old, and she was fast, and her hand came up with a slender bone pin that had been holding her gray hair, its point gone dark and oily in the lamplight, and she drove it not at Runa but at the king, quick as a struck snake across the little space between them. But Runa had grown up watching those hands. She had watched them do this very thing to rats in a cellar when she was small, and told herself she had imagined it. She caught the thin wrist out of the air before the point ever found him, and she twisted the way you twist to set a bone, and the pin fell ringing to the stone, and she bore the woman who raised her down onto the cold floor, and held her there with a knee between her shoulders, the way she had once seen guards hold a thief. She leaned close to the gray head. "You taught me every poison in your box, Mother," she said, very quietly. "So only Alder would hear. You should not have forgotten. I know every cure as well." Then the foreign guards had her, and they lifted her up and bore her out, and the thing that had ruled the hollows through love for 30 years went from that room a prisoner. And it was done. They took Runa to the princess, and she was as good as her word. She worked over the girl through the long remainder of the night, the way she had once worked over a dying stranger on a tannery floor, with steam and bitter draughts and her own 2 hands and no sleep at all, coaxing the patient poison back up out of her drop, by grudging drop. A little before dawn, Celine opened her eyes and asked, in a small, cracked voice, for water. Halvard, who by his own account had not wept in 40 years, wept then, and the alliance that had nearly become a war held after all. It was full morning before Corvin found her, alone in an antechamber, scrubbing poison from under her nails. "You saved my life," he said from the doorway. "You saved all of it. Even after what I did, you still—" "I came to stop a murder," Runa said, without turning around. That is all it was. The silence stretched. "Runa," he said, and she heard him take a step. "The bond. It is real. You felt it on the gallery. I know you did." "It does not matter if it is real," she said, and made herself face him, and made her voice as cold as the winter he had never had to live in. "You looked me in the eye for a season, and used me to bring down the only mother I have ever had. She may deserve it, she may be everything you say, but you let me love you to get to her, and a bond does not undo that." She picked up her cloak. "I am glad you will live. You will be a good king, I think, better than she ever let me believe. But I cannot trust you. I do not know that I ever will again." She saw it reach him, the understanding that he had broken a thing that would not come whole again. Then she walked out, and this time he did not follow. She was master of the royal still room for 6 months, and she was good at it, and she had always known she would be. The palace was a different place by then. Mother Alder sat in a cell beneath the old fort, and the black trade she had run through the almshouse for 30 years had been cut out root and branch. And here was the thing, Runa could not make sit right inside her. With Alder gone, the grain came. The storehouses opened. A king who had spent his whole reign being told the poor were not his to worry over, went down into the hollows himself, plainly dressed, and stood in the lane she had grown up in, and listened. He was becoming, month by month, the answer to the grievance she had carried her whole life, and she had learned at last whose grievance it had truly been. It was a strange thing to hate a man and to watch him do, one after another, every good thing you had ever accused his crown of leaving undone. Every cart that rolled down into the hollows took another brick out of the wall she had built against him. She almost wished he would do something cruel, something kingly and cold, so that she could go on being right about him. He never once did. He did not send flowers. He was cleverer than that, and he knew her better. What he sent was proof. Word drifted up from the hollows with every supply cart. The almshouse re-roofed and honestly run. A fever house built by the low gate where the tannery had stood, and no herald anywhere sent to boast of any of it. And under her ribs all season the bond stayed open on his side. A low, steady warmth, patient as a banked fire, asking nothing, simply there. She kept her own side shut against it and told herself it would wither if she starved it long enough. It did not wither. Left alone, a bond only deepens, and deepened it sets. And so she held it closed with both hands and lay cold in a warm bed and called it peace. Some nights the warmth pressed so gently at the shut door of her that she woke with her hand pressed over her own heart and tears on her face and no memory of having grieved. She would tell herself it was only a wound closing wrong. She was a healer. She knew that some wounds, left alone, never close at all. She kept it shut anyway. Hala and Tam came up from the hollows to see her, and they were not subtle. "Good," said Hala in the early weeks, arms folded. "Let him freeze a while. You owe that man nothing." But the weeks turned, and the carts kept coming, and one evening Tam said, "Careful." He carried old Rena's boy through the snow himself. Runa, whole quarter saw it. And he has never once said your name to any of us. He only asks, "Are the people warm?" That was the cruelest part, Runa thought. Not that he groveled, but that he did not. He simply became, quietly and with no audience anywhere to see it. The king she had spent her whole life, certain the crown could never give the hollows, and then left her alone to make of it whatever she would. By the 5th month even Hala had turned, "Captain of your own heart, or not," she said. "The man is trying to become worth you, and you are up here turning to ice, to spite him, and the rest of us have to watch, talk to him." "There is nothing to say," Runa said. "I was used. I am not lining up to be used again." She did not believe herself, but she said it well. Then in the 6th month, the thing came that she had told herself she wanted. It was not a letter. A palace steward brought it to her still room, folded in clean cloth, and when she opened it, her breath stopped. It was her blanket. Thin and gray and worn, soft, mended at the corner with her own child's stitching, washed and folded with a care that undid her more than any words could. There was a single line with it, in his own hand. "You gave me the only warm thing you had, and I have spent half a year trying to become a king worth it. You have made your answer plain, and I will honor it. I am sorry. The blanket is yours. It always was. I will not ask again." She read it 3 times. This was what she had wanted. So why did it feel exactly like loss? She pressed the worn gray wool to her face, and it smelled of cedar and clean cold air, and faintly, underneath everything, of him. He had kept it half a year against his own fire, and then given it back, rather than hold on to one more thing of hers that she had not freely chosen to give. It was very nearly the most honorable thing anyone had ever done to her, and she hated him for it, and she could not stop crying, and she did not entirely understand why. He kept his word. No more carts arrived, bearing her name, in the driver's mouth. When they passed in the corridors, he inclined his head. Master Runa, even and courteous, and moved on. Not cold. Never cold. Only finished. This is what you wanted, she told herself, and folded her old blanket at the foot of the bed she did not warm, and did her work. And every night, the low patient thread under her ribs stayed exactly where it was, refusing to die until the night the knock came. Tam stood in her doorway, with Hala at his shoulder, both of them the particular gray of people who have made a terrible mistake. "What?" Runa said, already rising. "What did you do?" "He is gone," said Hala. "The king. Not in his chambers. Not anywhere. No horse taken, no guard. His sword on its stand and his cloak on its hook, and his rooms neat and empty. No one has seen him since the 10th bell." Runa was on her feet without deciding to be. "When was he last seen?" she said. "And where was he headed?" Already reaching for her belt. "Wake the trackers. Take his scent from every gate." They took it. And they lost it. Down at the low gate of the hollows, where the trail simply ended in the falling snow. The way a trail ends when a man means not to be followed. Runa stood in the courtyard with the pre-dawn wind cutting through her, and she knew there was only one way left to find him, and she had spent 6 months smothering it. She pressed her hand flat to her chest, over the bond she had starved half a year, and she opened it. It hit her like a door blown wide in a storm. Cold first, bone cold, the deep killing cold she had spent her whole life learning to read. Then a great tiredness, a quiet, drifting, giving up. And under it all, faint and steady and turned toward her even now, the warmth he had never once stopped sending, guttering low, like a fire no one had fed. He was not taken. No one was carrying him, there was no blade, no cell, no poison. There was only a man alone in the cold, letting it have him, and he had walked into it on his own 2 feet. She was running before the thought had finished. The bond pulled her down out of the palace and into the hollows, down the crooked lanes where the lamp oil ran out early, down toward the low gate, through the thickening snow, and she followed it the way you follow a rope hauling you in. It led her exactly where some part of her had known it would. To the old tannery, to the doorway where a girl with one blanket had once knelt beside a dying stranger and refused to let the winter have him. He was there. He was sitting where she had found him, his back against the same cold stone, and he had no cloak. She saw why at once. A little way off, a Hollow's child slept in a doorway wrapped in a fine gray mantle 3 sizes too large for her warm, and Corvin sat bare to the wind that had already turned his lips the color of old snow, having given his warmth away exactly as she once gave hers, and having, in the way of proud men, entirely forgotten to keep enough for himself. For half a heartbeat the sight of him undid her completely, because it was her own act, handed back to her across half a year and a whole, hard life. This was what she had done in this exact doorway. For him, when he was nothing to her at all, but a stranger dying in the cold. He had learned it from her. He had learned it so well that it had very nearly killed him. "King of all the North," she said, and her voice shook, half fury and half something else. "And you cannot even mind your own skin." His head came up. It took him a moment to find her in the dark, and when he did, his whole ruined, frozen face broke open into something so glad it hurt to look at. "Runa," he breathed. And through the open bond, she felt it strike him all at once, the disbelief, the joy, the helpless relief. "You opened it. I felt you open it. You gave a child your cloak, in the dead of winter, and sat down to freeze," she said, dropping to her knees in front of him, already pulling the bundle off her own back. "You have lost your mind." She unfolded it over him. Thin and gray and worn, soft and carried down through the snow, and she wrapped it twice around the King of the North and tucked it under him where the heat leached out fastest, exactly as she had the first time, and the whole of her life seemed to fold over on itself and touch its own beginning. "You came back for me," he said, wondering, watching her hands. "Finding you is my job," she said thickly. I am the one who knows the cold. He caught her wrist. His fingers were ice. Runa, I did not come here to freeze. I swear it. He shut his eyes. I could not stop coming back to the one place someone chose me before they knew what I was worth. He drew a rough breath. Tell me to go, and I will never trouble you again. Or, what, she said. Or stay, he said. His voice cracked right down the middle of it. Stay, and let me spend the rest of my life being the warm thing for once. I am a poor king, without you and a worse man. Marry me, Runa. Not for the craft, not for a door. For nothing in the world but that I love you and I am cold every hour that you are not there. He was shaking too hard now to hide it. I have no right to ask. Ask me anyway. He ran out of words and dropped his head. And threw the bond wide open, now on both sides. At last, it all poured through, with nothing held back and no angle anywhere in it. The love, the grief, the missing, her that felt like dying. The man who hid everything, hiding nothing at all. Ask me again when you are warm, she said, and her own voice was not steady. When you can feel your own hands, when you are not half froze in a doorway making a fool of us both. His eyes cracked open. And you will say yes, he said. She looked at him a long moment, at the fool king wrapped in her only blanket in the doorway, where it all began. And for the first time in 6 months, Runa felt herself smile. She leaned in and pressed her mouth to his frozen forehead, the way she had once before when he could not hear her. Except this time he could. Get warm first, she said, and find out. In the end, it took him the rest of that winter and most of the spring. He asked her warm, and he asked her sober, and he asked her badly and beautifully. He asked across the council table until Severin threatened to resign in writing. He asked in the fever house by the low gate, with a sick child asleep on his shoulder. He asked once with so many hothouse flowers that the whole still room smelled like a funeral for a week, and she told him to send them to the sick, and he did, and asked again the next morning. And every day, Runa told him to ask again tomorrow, until one perfectly ordinary morning she looked up from her work at the man grinning hopefully at her across it, and she said yes. The whole of the hollows came out for it. The boy king nobody had troubled to take seriously, and the foundling healer who had seen the man behind the crown before anyone else bothered to look, he wept during the vows. She had known he would. She did not quite, but the bond gave her away regardless, and he laughed at her through his own tears, and she stopped caring who saw. Hala cried harder than the both of them and denied it to her dying day. The fever house by the low gate shut its doors for the afternoon, so that everyone who had ever been warmed there could stand in the snow and watch a foundling healer marry the king who had finally come down to be one of them. You are stuck with me now, he murmured when it was done. Warm hand curved to her cheek. No giving it back. Why would I? Said Runa. I am the one who covered you first, if you recall. Best decision I ever made, said the king. And for once she did not argue. She only pulled the collar of his coat straight against the cold he would never have to face alone again, and led him home.